Hello everyone, so today's video is going to be my wrap up for September and October, all the manga I read in those 2 months. I have a lot to show you, so I'm just going to jump right into it because I don't want to make this video too long. So the first thing I finished in September was Summit of the Gods, so I read volumes 3 through 5 in September. So if you want to hear my first beginning thoughts, you can watch my last wrap up video. I'll link it up there so you can watch it. But, so when I was reading this, I was not 100% enjoying it the first half. And I will say that continued as I continue to read it. These volumes are just so long. There's so much dialogue that I feel like does not need to be in there all the time. And it just kind of hampered the story. And I did enjoy the ending and the characters, but the overall experience of reading the manga was not that enjoyable. I didn't want to read it anymore. I have a few tweets where I'm complaining about this. I just wanted to be reading something else. So that's my thoughts on this. I think that's a very unpopular opinion about this, but I just didn't care for it that much. I did like the ending. I liked some of the elements of the story. I do like the premise, but the execution I felt like was not entirely there, which might be blasphemy when I'm talking about Jiro Taniguchi, but I don't care. So that's my thoughts on this. And then pretty much the only other thing I read in September was Astrology and Space, volumes 1 through 5, the complete series. So this is about a group of 9 teenagers who are on a spaceship. They think they're going to like a space camp, but something ends up changing, and that's not what the story is about. I don't want to spoil anything. I think you should just read it. It's short enough that there's not really any commitment with this. But, so my thoughts on this. I really, really liked this. I liked all the characters in here. I do feel like I wish we could have gotten a little bit more focus on each of the characters. There are 9 main characters in the series, and there's only 5 volumes. So there's not really enough time to give all of the characters a lot of screen time. They do each get their own kind of moment to shine, which I appreciate, but I think it could have been, there could have been more of that. And I'm not sure exactly how this story happened, if it got cut, or this is how it was supposed to be, if there were supposed to be only 5 volumes. I'm not sure. But I really, really enjoyed this series. There were quite a few plot points, plot twists. I kind of predicted some of them. I didn't predict all of them. And I really enjoyed all the characters and the story and the entire premise of this. I really enjoyed. And I definitely could reread this. My only complaint, and it's not even a complaint, it's just a personal preference, is I wish it was longer, just so I could have enjoyed it for a longer time. I don't think it needed to be longer. I don't think it was missing anything besides kind of just a little bit more character analysis, like I mentioned earlier. But I don't think it is necessary for it to be longer. I don't think it's missing anything. I just wish it was longer so I could have read it longer, if that makes sense. I personally like longer series more than shorter series. I don't know why. I think that's another unpopular opinion. But I really like longer series, just so I have more time to appreciate the characters, especially characters I love as much as these ones. I wish the series was longer so I could be with them for longer. But there's nothing inherently wrong with the length of the series. It's just a personal preference, but overall I really enjoyed this series. I could definitely reread it in the future, and I would recommend this. This is one of my new favorite short manga series. So the next thing I read, kind of in September, kind of in October, mostly in October, was Happiness. So I reread volumes 1 through 7, which I read a few years ago, and I dropped the series at the end of volume 7. I've talked about this many times. I dropped the series at the end of volume 7 because I did not like the direction it was going, and then now I decided to pick it back up and finish it, and I really enjoyed the ending. If you don't know, this is about vampires. It's kind of easy to tell, and I don't want to say too much about the story. I do have some complaints about this series. One, I feel like the violence is pretty gratuitous sometimes. It's very gory, and I don't think it needs to be that gory, even though it is about vampires. That's not even the gore that I'm talking about. And I don't want to spoil it, obviously, but the gore has nothing to do with the actual vampires. So I do still feel like some of those elements are a little bit gratuitous. They don't need to be in here. And I didn't enjoy those aspects of it. However, I do enjoy pretty much all of Oshimi's works I've read so far have had some kind of time skip element, and I always enjoy the time skip element. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much in this one as I did in like Flowers of Evil, but I do like seeing the time skip elements and how he decides to use the characters after the big kind of like really dramatic storyline. He continues it and shows the repercussions of what happened. And like the title suggests, this is a manga that asks a lot of questions about happiness and how can you be happy after dealing with trauma and death and grief. What does happiness look like for different people? And I really appreciated that about this. Oshimi's works always ask a lot of interesting questions like that. So yeah, not my favorite Oshimi work, but I do definitely still like it, like all of his other works I've read so far. And I would recommend this, just as long as you know that it is very, very violent sometimes. So yeah. And then next, so part of this was read before the Haunted 24-hour readathon, and part of it was finished during the 24-hour readathon. So this is kind of my segment to go into the 24-hour readathon that I hosted with Justy's Cave and Dices 19. So yeah. So the next one I read was Kikigami. So I read volumes 2 through 10, and so I finished the series. So I'm going to start with my positives about the series. One, the art is absolutely great. The way that the author can express emotions through characters is really important, especially for a series like this, where there's lots of people dying and grief and those kind of emotions being expressed. That's really important. And then I do appreciate most of the characters. They're always very interesting. I do feel like sometimes some of the characters were kind of repeated, or the situations were repeated, because this is a very episodic series. I feel like some of the episodes kind of felt like very, very similar to each other. And that leads me into my next complaint, which is volume 7 through 8 kind of felt like filler, where just more of these short stories are happening without really any movement of the main plot. And so I kind of noticed that, and I was wondering if that's because the author wasn't sure exactly how they wanted to end the series, and maybe that's what they were doing. I don't know, that's just an assumption. I have no actual basis for that. But obviously, I always enjoy a good dystopian series that explores how government is corrupt and different ways the government could be corrupt, and this one definitely does that. However, so this series, I haven't really talked about the premise because I assume that people look up the premises, which is probably not true. So this is about the government injecting people with a little capsule, and then that randomly someone will be selected to die in 24 hours. They're only given 24 hours notice, and so we follow a bunch of people who have been given an Ikigami is what it's called, and then how that affects their lives, their relationship with their family members, their friends, other people around them. So it's very easy to tell that the author meant for this to obviously be negative. Like, the government is controlling who lives, who dies. The message is very clear. This is not okay. However, it's not always clear, because sometimes, and in fact, many, many times, these deaths end up being like a net positive, which sounds very bad. But, so something positive will happen as a result of these deaths. Many, many times. Whether it's people coming together, families coming together that were separated before, or, like, I don't know, people getting out of their bad situations, deciding to turn their life around, something like that, okay? Something positive happens many, many, many times with these deaths. And I feel like that kind of contradicts the message of all of these deaths are bad and we shouldn't be choosing how people die. Obviously, that's the main message that's going, but I feel like the actual content doesn't actually agree with that sometimes. This is kind of a deconstructionist viewpoint of this series, if you will, but I just noticed that it kind of ends up being like that, especially towards the end, when I was talking about the filler volume 7 and 8. They're not necessarily filler, but they kind of feel like filler. A lot of those end up being like, oh, this death is so sad, but we have a positive view of it for some reason. And I don't know, it just kind of felt out of place a little bit with the main message that was happening. Also, I have mixed feelings about the ending. There's nothing inherently wrong with the ending. It's just not the way I wanted it to go. It's a perfectly acceptable ending. It's just not the way I wanted it to be. So that's just personal preference with that. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy this series as much as I'm harping on it. I did really enjoy it. I liked all the characters. I liked the main plot for the most part, and I liked the art for sure. I do have complaints about everything I talk about though. But yeah, there's this one. So next, during the Haunted 24-hour readathon, I read some more Junji Ito, because I have lots of Junji Ito on my shelves that I haven't gotten to yet, and I feel like 2 of his books release every year, and I just don't ever catch up. So this time I read Censor and Smashed. So Censor follows kind of like haunted hair. And yeah, so this is hard to explain, but there's cult stuff, there's weird magical hair that controls people's minds. It's very strange. There's like aliens, maybe? It's weird. It's Junji Ito. I liked it, but if you don't like Junji Ito, you're not gonna like this. And then Smash is a bunch of short stories. Junji Ito always shines with the short stories, and this is no exception. They're short stories by Junji Ito. If you don't like Junji Ito, you're not gonna like these. But that's what these are. I have no other thoughts on these, really. They're Junji Ito, so. Okay, and speaking of horror manga, the next thing I read during the readathon was The Drifting Classroom. So I read the complete series, these giant omnibuses, volumes 1 through 3. So I'm going to start with a preface right here. I feel like Kazuo Ume's, his whole goal in the series was to figure out how many different ways he could draw children dying. Because that's what the series is many, many children dying in very gruesome ways. And by children, I mean like they're all like 10 years old and younger. So just letting you know, if that's not something you want to read, then don't read this, because that's a lot of it. A lot of it. So this follows this school of children who get displaced in time, kind of, and they have to survive this really weird world they find themselves in. And it's not just things on the outside that they're in danger of, it's also people on the inside that they're in danger of. So typical horror stuff. So overall, I really, really enjoyed this series, and I can definitely see how more modern manga artists are influenced by this series and Kazuo Ume's in general. I definitely felt like I had read some things in here before, but that's just because I've read things that were influenced by this. I do feel like it dragged at some points. I needed some breaks because obviously lots of people are dying over and over again in different ways. But I did enjoy the ending. I thought the conclusion to the main plot or the main problem was interesting. I probably wouldn't have come up with that idea, but I thought it was interesting, and I did like the overall ending and the kind of situation that ended up happening, which I'm not going to spoil, obviously, but I did enjoy this series. I would probably reread it in the future. That's why I'm keeping it on my shelves, and I do think it was important to read as someone who likes horror manga, to read something that's kind of a foundation of the genre. And next I read 2 series that kind of feel like trashy horror manga. So I continued my read of Real Accounts. So I read volumes 4 through 8 during the readathon, and I think I'm done with this. This is it's entertaining, but I don't know if there's any actual substance to it for me. So it's very much like a commentary on social media and how people are trying to get validation through social media, and how this is like a death game based on that. So people are trying to seek validation or they die, basically. And so I kind of like the commentary going there. It's very in your face and obvious, but it is entertaining. I like some of the characters, but I think I've just gotten enough out of this. I don't think I need to read any more of it. There's some things happening with the main character that I don't know what to think about, and I just don't really care anymore. So I think I'm done with this. It was entertaining enough to read, but I don't need to read anymore. I think I got the gist. So there's that. And next, I don't have a physical copy of this to show you because I read it digitally, and I don't think there are physical copies of it. Anyway, so I read Until Your Bones Rot. So I read volumes 1 through 7, which is the complete series. This is kind of like a I Know What You Did Last Summer series. So it follows this group of teens who, when they were younger, they killed someone, and now every year they come back to the place where they buried the body and kind of reform their bonds, I guess, and make sure that none of them are going to tell on each other for killing this person. So the premise is interesting. The characters are okay. However, I felt like the execution of the entire story was just not for me. There were plot points and plot twists I did not care for. I don't think they were inherently bad. I just did not like the way they were going. I didn't like the decisions that were made, the plot twists that were happening. I didn't care for any of it, really. So this is what I would call a very messy series. The character relationships are also very messy. So if you like weird character dynamics, not weird, just complicated character dynamics, and maybe you should try this out. But this was just not for me. Overall, I didn't really care for it. So it's probably my least favorite read in the month, I think. So that was pretty much everything I read during the readathon. I read quite a few volumes, 24 volumes. And I really appreciated the readathon. I got to read way more than I usually would during a weekend, even though I had to work 3 out of the 4 days that we were doing the readathon. So thanks to Justy for being the main host. But then we're going to follow my least favorite read of the month with my most favorite read of the month, probably. So that was Toilet Bound Hana Cocoon. So I read volumes 1 through 15. So only 10 volumes are out physically, but there are 15 volumes out digitally. So I bought the last 5 volumes out digitally so I could continue reading the series because I really, really like it. So I'm sure you've heard the premise of this before, but it follows this girl who asks for a wish from Hanako-san, she thinks. So the ghost of the toilets ends up being this guy, and then it just follows their wacky adventures. So I really, really, really like all of the characters in the series. The characters are what make it, and in fact, that's the case for many series I read. If the characters are fantastic, I probably like the series, and that's true for this as well. I like all the characters. I don't think there's a single boring character. There are some characters that look similar, but they're not boring. And of course, I love the art in this series. It's very, like, I don't know, the vibes this series has, the spooky vibes. I really appreciate it. And while I was reading, I was kind of reminded of Noragami. I don't know why, because they're different premises, but I just felt like it kind of reminded me of Noragami with the paranormal aspects. But personally, this has more memorable characters for me, and it's just a lot more enjoyable than Origami was. Not that I disliked Origami. I just talked about Origami and how I liked it. I just feel like this is more, personally, more impactful to me than Origami was. It's just more my style than Origami was. And so yeah, this is just a really fun series. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but there are like serious elements, angsty moments, if you will, that I really appreciate. I really like the balance between a funny series with great characters that's also can be serious and feel like there's a sense of danger in it. And I feel like that's what this is for sure. So whenever the next volume comes out digitally, I'll be picking that up. I'm not going to wait for these to come out physically. I'm going to read them digitally as they come out, because I really like the series. So yeah, that's everything I read in September and October. Let me know if you read any of these and what your thoughts are, or what you read in September or October, or what your favorite read was, what your least favorite read was. Any of those comments, I'd appreciate them down below. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!